morning, Anna.
Good morning, Lana.
So schools, we have Annebet van Mameren. Hello.
Hey, hi.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good
Thanks
morning.
for joining us.
So you're the owner of New to NL, and you know everything there is to know about the Dutch education system. So tell me, how did you get into this?
Yeah, that's a very interesting story, actually, because all the things that I'm interested in, that I studied for, my experience all came together in my own business. Mm-hmm. So my mother has always worked in education. She taught Dutch first to foreign children and then adults.
Okay.
I've studied organizational psychology, and I was graduated in the area of intercultural conflicts at work. So with a lot of different nationalities and also very interesting.
Yeah.
Then I graduated and I lived in Italy for 2.5 years. So
that must have been fun.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, that was a really great experience. Then I moved back to Amsterdam and I married an American. And
as did we all.
Well, yes, we have that in common.
Indeed. And we have 2 children who grow up bilingually. And they go to a Dutch school.
Okay.
But before I could enroll my son in a Dutch school, it was really difficult to get a place for him because of the lottery and all those things.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a bit better now, luckily. Mm-hmm. And I was the organizer of the Amsterdam Moms and Dads meetup group. So I organized a lot of play dates and excursions for international families. And I got so many questions, especially about schools. So I started to give presentations to them. And from one thing, the other thing happened. And then I started my own business.
Just kind of evolved, I guess.
Yeah,
I love it when it happens all organic. And then I just figured I might as well get paid for it.
Exactly.
I think that's how we all started. That's so great.
So when did you actually start New to NL then? Because you said you started to give presentations and then it evolved. So what was the next step and how did you get to where you are now?
I registered my business in July 2013, so a bit over 6 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Oh, yes, it does. And in the beginning, I just gave these presentations. And then after a few of them, one of the fathers said, okay, I understand how the system works, but how do I find a school for my daughter? So, oh, yeah, actually, you have a good point. So I started to look into the schools in his area, and he just lived at the border of Amsterdam West and South. And back then they had different policies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I immediately dove into the whole thing and contacted the municipality and had a lot of questions. And so in that way, I really started to understand the local Amsterdam system. And then he referred me to his friends and colleagues, and that is how it really started rolling. Yeah,
that's great.
It's actually such valuable information.
Oh, it is.
Really.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting. And from my mother, I learned a lot about education in general. And with my own children going to school, I also noticed all the practicalities in daily school life. And so, it all comes together.
Yeah, it's such an individual choice as well, right? I think we're going to talk about that a bit later, what to look for when you're selecting school. But I can imagine that every family has things that they would prefer or wouldn't prefer.
Yeah,
so
it's very personal.
Keeps you busy, for sure.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's
There's
very
no
busy.
standard to it, except for maybe the lottery thing. But even that depends on what kind of schooling you want.
And where you live.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So we are here with Annebet van Mameren talking about Dutch education, and we got a lot of questions through some of the Facebook groups that we have, quite a few of them. Amsterdam Families, Moments with Mothers, Gooise Mamas, our Instagram page, you name it, Expat Family Market. Yeah. We asked you guys, what do you want to know about Dutch schools, Dutch education, and you want to know a lot. So, Lana, what were some of the questions that we got from our audience?
Okay, so we've got one that said, and this came up a lot, when is the best time to start looking at schools and how early before the child turns 4? Yeah, and then there's more questions. We'll start with that one.
Yeah, that's indeed a very important question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it doesn't have one single answer because, first of all, it depends on where you live. So in Amsterdam, the schools are allocated through a lottery. And the lottery deadline is around 3 years and 2 months of age. But for example, when you live in Amstelveen, you can already apply from age 2.
Yeah.
So you really, before you move to a new place, you really have to find out what is the deadline, what's the procedure, and how old, at what age do you need to start applying.
Right.
Yeah, because I live in Bern, in Het Gooi, and there we applied as soon as we moved there, and the kids were not even 2. So
That's
it's a little
very
bit
early.
different.
That's
And
early.
we're still on the waiting list.
Wow. Yeah.
And they are 2 times 2
Yeah,
year
that's-
olds,
you
so
have
maybe
twins,
that's
Yeah. That's
what
even
I
more
mean.
They
complicated.
don't want
too.
your kids, man. They've known your kids.
Yeah, but it is a little bit different outside of Amsterdam. I think today we're focusing more on Amsterdam, but it's a good point that, if you would move outside of Amsterdam, then there are different things to think about as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And so with the lottery, how many schools do you have to apply for, like, realistically? Do you really have to put in 8 schools?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in Amsterdam, there are actually 2 parallel systems. You have the central system that applies to almost all schools of Amsterdam. And for those central schools, you get priority for 8 schools that are closest to your house.
Okay, so
So-
it's distance.
Yeah, there's a website called schoolwijzer.amsterdam. Maybe you could include that in the links or something.
Yeah, we will.
Very important.
Otherwise, we have to spell it. And there you type in your postcode, in house number, and then you can see which 8 schools you have priority for.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's
very
very
helpful,
important
yeah.
website,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
The parallel system, there are about 11 schools that don't take part in the central system. And those schools are called eenpitter. Maybe you have seen that term before.
Yeah.
And
No,
they are
no
not...
idea.
Well, when you don't live in Amsterdam, then you don't need to know what it is because it's a really Amsterdam thing.
And what is it exactly?
Eenpitters, they are still schools funded by the government, but they have their own school board that usually exists of 1 or 2 member schools. And they can, up to a certain extent, of course, they can decide on their own rules.
Oh.
So they have their own lottery deadline, their own catchment area, their own application forms. So everything is separate.
Would it
they're
be
not-
fair to say that they're also more expensive then?
Yes, their parent contribution is higher than
Yeah.
the central schools.
But not
Okay.
private schools.
No, they're not private. They're still funded by the government, but they ask a higher parent contribution because it's another thing they can decide for themselves. So the eenpitter schools, they ask, most of them between 600 and 800 euros per year per
Okay.
child. And the central schools up to 100 euros, most of
Okay.
them.
Okay.
So there is a big difference in that respect.
But those are also the public schools, right? That's what generally is known as the public schools.
Yeah, the word public is very confusing in the Netherlands because the Dutch word is openbaar, but they are only the schools that are run by a foundation that originally has been set up by the government.
Yeah.
So they're now more independent. And the openbare schools are always not religious.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, because you still see that with like the religions being, and then when you actually go and visit those schools, because I had to for my kid, because I was afraid of the whole religion thing. You don't even find it back. It's just in the
True.
name. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it depends on the school.
School.
Okay.
Yeah.
The religious schools, so they're still funded by the government. So in a lot of countries, the religious schools are private, but that's not the case in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Like in the US, most religious
Yeah.
schools
Exactly,
are, right,
yeah. And but most of them have been founded a long time ago when religion was still much more important in the Netherlands than it is nowadays. Mm-hmm. So in name, they're still religious, but in practice, you will not notice much.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I didn't know that.
No.
And the religious schools, they have their own school board. And so they're not openbaar in that respect, but still funded by the government. So when you say public, I don't really know what you mean.
Right.
Oh, right. But that just shows how different it is country by country.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different here.
And the literal translation is public from
Exactly.
openbaar, so
Yeah.
that's confusing.
Yeah, it is confusing.
That is.
It's the literal translation. It's just not.
No.
No.
An exception. It's
Yeah.
an exception. So we have another question from the audience. What happens if your child or you become unhappy with the school where your child has been placed initially? Is there an opportunity to transfer? How does that work?
Yeah.
Have you had that experience with families before, and what did they
Yeah,
do?
it does happen. So, like I said, so through the lottery, most children get a place at the school. It can be that if you want to change schools later, that the schools are full and then they don't have a place. So some
right,
parents
yeah.
expect, I live nearby the school, so they have to take me.
Ha.
No.
Nope,
That's not the case.
Yeah.
When they're full, they're full. Even if you live on top of the school, you don't get automatic place there.
But I am the school. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can try.
So what's the best thing to do if you're feeling unsure about your choice? Like we were talking about earlier, sometimes you have to decide much
True.
further in
Yeah.
advance, and maybe circumstances have changed and the school is no longer a good match for your child. What should you do?
Yeah, my first advice is always try and solve it. Talk to the teacher. That's very important. A lot of parents are afraid to talk to the teacher, or they don't know how. Maybe the problem is easy to solve.
Right, yeah.
Or when you are unhappy or when you don't understand things, just talk about it.
Yeah.
And most
are
schools,
quite open to that type of feedback from the parents here?
yeah, they actually want you to talk about your child and how things are going. And that's what they expect from you.
Yeah, and we have to remember that, well, Dutch people are quite direct, right?
Exactly,
so,
yeah.
Don't be afraid
Yeah.
to bring it up.
Yeah, and some parents, they immediately want to go to the principal and complain or write an email, an angry email, and don't do that. You have a problem with the teacher, talk to the teacher in person, and just...
Communicate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of problems can already be solved that way, because in the end there was a misunderstanding, or your child had perceived something that actually didn't happen that way,
Yeah.
but...
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
think that's really
always-
good advice. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, great.
And
yeah.
if it really, really doesn't work out, then you can indeed think about changing schools.
Yeah.
But then before you leave your current school, you have to find a place at a new school.
Right.
And then you really have to call them one by one and ask if they still have a place for your child's age.
Yeah, I have to start over, basically.
Yes, indeed.
okay.
But then there's no lottery anymore. So then it really depends on, do they have a place, yes or no?
Yeah, fair enough. So
we,
yeah,
we had a couple other questions from the audience, a lot of questions. But
Yeah.
what was the next one, Lana?
So, a lot of things that I've also heard in my business with Amsterdam Family Assistance is, do you find a house first or do you find a school first? Now, I know from a relocator point of view, it's better to find a house because then, at least that's settled and you can find something else. I take it with you being more for education, you would say education or school first. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot as well.
Kind of chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, the short answer is it goes hand in hand. And what I often see happening that parents, they're very happy that they finally found a house, which isn't easy either. Mm-hmm. But then they discover that the schools around their house are completely full.
Yeah.
Or they want a Montessori school and there is none in their area.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's a lot of different philosophies as well, right? That
Exactly.
might play into that decision.
Yeah, so it really depends on the age of the child. So if they are younger, so in case of Amsterdam, if they're younger than 3 years and 2 months, you still have to take part in the lottery and then you get a place through the lottery. Mm-hmm. But if your child has missed the lottery,
Yeah.
then it really depends on the availability of the school.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
So-
you don't even have a choice.
Maybe not. It
No.
depends. So before you sign the house contract, you really have to make sure that the schools in that area still have
Right.
availability.
That's important. Yeah.
And that's what a lot of parents forget.
yeah.
I guess they don't really know that there might just not be a space near their home.
They're probably so overwhelmed.
Yeah,
I can
that's very
imagine,
true.
Yeah.
But the other way is also true, that some people, they find a very nice school, but then they cannot find a house in the
Right,
area.
But how would that work if you found the school and then you don't get a home in that area? Can you still choose that school if they have a space, but you live a bit further away? Then it's not so based on the postcode, or?
Yeah, so after the lottery, the postcode doesn't matter as much. But some schools prefer you to live in the area. So some are a bit more strict than others. So that's also something you have to know in advance.
Yeah.
But the Dutch schools especially, they're really neighborhood schools. So most children go to school on foot or by bike. They have a lot of play dates after school that they organize spontaneously themselves.
Yeah.
So if you are the only family living further away, then it becomes much more difficult to organize play dates. And you often have to go to school, or maybe your child forgot their gym bag and you have to go back. And all those things don't work when you live far away.
Right.
So that's really something to consider. And
so much to think about.
Yeah,
it's really a lot, yes.
Yeah, and you're already overwhelmed. You're going into a new country. There's the housing thing is a big thing. But then there's also the health insurance thing. I mean, there's so many. This is the reason why people get relocators, because it's overwhelming. It really is.
It really is. Because we were also talking about in the break, well, I was asking you some questions. There seem to be so many different types of schools with different philosophies and different curriculum. What the heck is that about?
So for Dutch parents, it's very, very important that they can choose the school that matches with their values, with their ideas about education. And there's a lot of different types, and almost all schools are funded by the government.
Yeah.
So there are a few private fee-paying schools, but that's really only a couple of them. But then, indeed, you have the religious schools we already talked about earlier, but also schools based on the philosophy like Montessori or Waldorf or Dalton or Jenaplan and some other types.
Yeah.
And they all have a different approach. So you really have to make sure that the way of teaching matches to your ideas about education and the way you raise your children. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
But could it be, for instance, because I know this was a thing, what I was looking into, like I could be, let's for instance, be as Waldorf as I can be, but my kid needs like military academy. You know, like how like do you talk to the kids as well? Do you go out when you help a family? Do you talk to the kids and go like, well, I mean, you might be really nice hippie parents, but your kid is a maniac, or like, do you
are
sort
there
of
resources?
Yeah.
To help them decide which school fits well with their
children
child
instead of their own needs.
Yeah, I always talk with the parents about their children, so I ask a lot of questions.
Okay.
So what type of child do you have? But also, how do you communicate with your child?
Yeah.
What do you expect from them? So, for example, Montessori is very independent.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't work when parents are very strict with their children and they tell them exactly what they need to do first and what next.
Yeah.
And then this child goes to Montessori school and the teacher asks them, oh, what are you going to do today?
They can't make a decision.
No. That's way too confusing.
Yeah.
So then Montessori is not a good type. So a lot of people say Montessori suits almost every child, but not every parent.
Wouldn't work for me myself. Nope. What are you going to do today? I don't know.
But it's also good to realize that the government has set standards for every school, for every year. They call them core objectives.
Okay.
So those are the basic things that all schools have to teach.
Okay.
But so it cannot be that at Montessori, for example, that the children, when they don't like to do math, they just don't do math. No, that's one of the core objectives. They have to do that.
Okay.
But then the schools have the freedom to fill in the details themselves, and then some teach according to philosophy or religion or other things.
But then what is the difference between, for instance, an international school and a Dutch school? Because that, I mean, except for the language, I guess, but what would be the difference between those?
Yeah, the language is indeed the main difference. Most international schools teach in English, but there's also a French school and a Japanese school. So, yeah, that's another difference, of course.
Yeah.
The international schools are more expensive.
Of course they are.
The Dutch government is one of the few countries in the world they subsidize international education. So you also have international schools for about 5,000 euros per year, compared to the private international schools that ask at least 18,000 euros.
Yeah.
So that is a big difference.
Yeah.
The population is different, of course. At international schools, most families only stay for a short time. So
true. Yeah.
They come and they go. So if your child is the one staying, they have to make new friends all the time, which can be frustrating.
Yeah. But if you're only planning to stay temporarily, do you usually recommend this route? Or is it also
Yeah, it depends on the age. When children are still young, then it's maybe nice to go to a Dutch school and they can play with the children from the neighborhood and go together to school.
Well, it definitely depends on the language as well, right?
Sure.
Like you just said, because if you're only staying for 3 years and maybe your child doesn't speak Dutch at all, then that must
pick
be...
it up quick, though.
They do.
That is true.
Every
but
family
it's a big
I've worked with,
transition.
within 3 months, the kids would speak Dutch to me.
Wow.
Yeah, it goes
Amazing.
really quick.
Yeah, but if the child is older, so from age 6 or older, they if you want to send them to Dutch school, they first have to go to a newcomer class to learn the language.
Right, yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. But if you leave the year after that, then it's a big investment for the child. And is it really worth it then?
That's true.
So if you're only staying for 2 to 3 years, I usually recommend international school. But if you want to stay longer and really integrate and make part of the community, then a Dutch school could be a very good option.
Yeah.
So it's a very personal decision.
For
really
sure.
is.
And this is why you are so valuable to so many families in this community, because these are hard decisions. There's a lot of things you need to think about. And I think it's an important time to also pitch, your services and all that you can do for
New
families.
to NL, people.
New to
This is where you
NL.
can find Annebet, because
Check
we
it
have
out.
a bajillion more questions, but
She can help you. And if you have questions, please send them through. We can forward them on. We're going to post about this conversation on Facebook. If you want to ask a question, Annebet's very active on Facebook as well.
I can talk about this for hours.
Yeah, have a coffee. She'll talk to you forever about it. And we're really glad to have her on our show today, at least to give you a few insights about Dutch
thank you
education.
so much.
Thank you.
Valuable information.
Podcast Amsterdam.
Yay! That was fun to listen to again.
Yeah, such great information from Annebet. Yeah. I love her story as well, that she just kind of started it from
Her
nothing,
own,
her own experience, and was just chatting with parents at first and then started giving seminars. So cool. I really love to see that people, take that initiative to really help people in the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you want to find more information about the Dutch healthcare system, you can always visit our website, amsterdamfamilies.com, or new to NL. I think it's www.
Education, you said healthcare. Oh. But that's okay. Healthcare you can find on Amsterdam Families as well. But that's okay. Education is on New to NL. It's fine. We have a lot of websites, people. It's just a lot. But it's all, you can find it all on amsterdamfamilies.com.
Guys, it's amsterdamfamilies.com. Whatever you're looking for, don't judge me.
So let's do the calendar. Let's play the loop. Here we go. Are you ready for this? It's so great. I love this in the background. There we go.
Okay. Well, it's fall now, and probably you're a little bit thinking, is it going to rain? Should I be outside? Should I be inside? Well, we have a few different options for you. One that I really like, I recently met with the owners here at Black Cat Theater. This is a new theater, fairly new, a couple months old, located near the Sloterdijk station. Mm-hmm. You can also park there really easily if you have a car, but you can take the train. They have a lot of different theater performances for children, actually age 1 to 6, but each show has a little bit of a different target audience. So this one is on Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. It's called Four Seasons, super cute, for age 1 to 5. And it basically takes you through the way nature changes throughout the year. It's really interactive. They actually don't do anything in a certain language. It's just music and performance. So it doesn't matter what language you speak in.
Oh, that's handy.
Yeah, it's really handy. So it's really fun for the whole family. They have a few shows per week. That's Black Cat Theater. And actually, not this weekend, but still important to mention since we are talking about the education system and had the interview with Annebet again today. She is hosting a special workshop this Thursday, October 1st, in the Rivierenbuurt, at the Robberberg International Playgroup Center there. Starting at 7:45, she is talking about how to find the most suitable school in Amsterdam for your children. I think this is so important, so worthwhile.
I wish someone really helped me, because I sort of Googled it and I asked, and thank God I met Annebet during a meeting, and I kind of asked her, and she was the one who told me about the school of my choice.
Yeah.
But, it would have helped me so much if I would have asked. So I really urge people, if your deadline is coming up, please go to this evening meeting and talk to her, because she knows it all.
Exactly.
And it will really calm your nerves.
Yeah, she's really the best person to ask. If you can't make the meeting, you can always reach out to her. We are going to post her contact details again.
Yeah.
And that's workshop is on Thursday, October 1st, 7:45 p.m., if you can make it.